Well, look at that, Aaron. We have a guest in the Honeycomb Hideout today.
That's right. Arlie's the cream in the cookie today.
Yeah, right.
Like right Oreo sandwich here.
I didn't even know what the heck you were talking.
You didn't know what I was going to say, did you?
What? What are you talking about?
So we're more like maybe like one of those oatmeal cookies with the.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Well, whatever. Okay, well, Arlie, welcome. We have a special guest today, and this is episode 26, and this is brand spanking new territory for us. It's the three wide. We're I don't know if it's a pinnacle of quality, but it's a pinnacle of number of people on this show. I mean, it's new territory for us. So. Arlie Hartman, thanks for joining us today for What Is XDR discussion. But if you could introduce yourself to more people probably know and are fond of you than the two of us. But to our other handful of viewers today, go ahead and introduce yourself if you would.
Sure, absolutely. I think I want to thank my mother for having the genius of naming me after my father, to have the weirdest name in information security. So, some say Prince, some say Cher, some say Arlie. In the central Indiana information security community, right, I've been around for a while. I come to you today as an employee of a large software company, which will remain unnamed. Because today on PTO, I represent myself and my experiences, right? So anybody can look me up on LinkedIn, been doing this for quite a while, held different roles in different size organizations, kind of all on the spectrum of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, right? Held roles in different specs. But I wanted to kind of come today with this conversation of where I was at my previous employer, a manufacturer that had never had a CISO or an information security program. They had grown from a simple set of factories in northern Indiana to a global company, and really we're trying to figure out what we could do to improve the posture. And
awesome.
With that. Yeah.
Cool. So we're gonna launch right into it. Conversation about XDR. That's our chit chat for today. So we'll transition to the other thing now. Here we go. All right, Arlie, I'm gonna start today queuing up as I often do with my grumpy old man, not stories, but I'm gonna share my grumpy old get off my lawn kind of perspective and admit this topic I've been wanting to do for a while, but XDR just ticks me off. It just riles me up. Like, I'm the grumpy old man. When I was doing this stuff, we had antivirus and firewall, and that was our security, and we liked it. I just feel like I've come to grips with as a professional around. We had EDR, endpoint detection and response, and a lot of people are still catching up there, don't have that yet. Maybe they're getting familiar with it because their cyber liability company is saying you have to have a piece of software with an EDR functionality to it. But endpoint detection and response, and then I think this is my guess. We're on this continuum. We went from EDR to managed detection and response of, well, that's not fun, owning that piece of software and having to know how to manage it and what to. I need to make this somebody else's problem. This isn't Gartner Forrester. These are definitions according to Brian. Okay, but
Right.
managed detection response, it's no fun dealing with that EDR software, and I don't know what to actually do with it. So I'm going to make that somebody else's problem, managed detection response. And then XDR, and it's not for lack of trying. I think I've gone out and read, and I think I could come up with an operative definition to share, but it ticks me off a little bit. I don't get it. So starting with, what is XDR, Arlie? Really?
Well, I mean, if you ask 3 different people, you get 3 different answers, right? I think it's the same as zero trust.
They're cousins. They're cousins.
Absolutely.
Maybe brother and sister. I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe, perhaps. There may not be any branches in that family tree. Who knows? But marketers are going to market, right? At the end of the day. So you're going to try to take something that is a problem space in information security and try to define something around it to then assist making analysts money. And then on top of that, helping, security professionals who don't have the time to put into the research, right, to kind of get a quick summary, to boil it down to maybe top 3 that I can kind of investigate to see if it fits my use case, right? But XDR can mean extended detection and response. Some call it cross-domain response. But really, what I see XDR is there was a gap in between. I've got my core set of tools and 16 different windows I've got to get into. And I've got a lot of log sources, right? And that's kind of what we talked about, going from endpoint protection to then EDR, and then realizing, wow, there's a lot of telemetry here and there's a lot of stuff going on I don't really understand. There's a lot of stuff from that black box and that airplane, why it went down. I don't have the time to analyze and figure out what's going on. Why wasn't I warned about it before it went down, right? So then managed detection response, like you said, came into the kind of play. And then it was like, okay, that's just another place that they can handle the tier 1 kind of endpoint. And then give me something on top, and then I'll put it and start doing some cross correlation, right? But at that point where that kind of worked, but then is that just not the MSSP model that we all ran away from in the beginning?
It's just your mess for less kind of thing, or your mess for more, maybe.
Your mess for more, maybe.
Depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, right, you didn't want to just have this email generating service over here kicking stuff over to you to then go have to figure out. And then I'm like, okay, let me punch in the hashes from this into my 6 different consoles and go look in mailboxes, and then how did this thing get in here? Let's figure that out. And oh, here I got a sandbox. I'll drop this file in, or I got to go over to virus total and check out the hashes there, and doing all the things the analysts do, right? What XDR tries to do and makes this implicit promise, or implicit, not explicit, implicit promise, right? Of, we want to help you take that telemetry across those different attack vectors and put it together in one place that you can then have visibility, you can hunt across, and you can take some sort of remediation, whether it be automated or it be manual. But try to surface up one place to kick off those connections and remediation.
So if I was to, I think you've covered it, but if I was to boil that into what's the problem or problems that XDR is solving, not solved by EDR, MDR, it's pulling together all, maybe not all, many of the security pieces into something that both pulls the data together and also lets me see, visualize, hopefully understand in one place. Or am I putting the wrong words?
No, I think you got exactly that, right? So as we had all these different tools, right? And then we said, well, they're all generating tons of logs, and I've got infrastructure and things that aren't necessarily security products, but are giving me some sort of telemetry. Whether it be network switches, packet flow, what's going on your servers, what's happening in your cloud infrastructure, things like that, right? So kind of like when I came into this manufacturer, right? MSSP model with an on-prem SIM, run and managed by the MSSP. I had access as a customer, but no training, no tooling, no kickstarts to get me to be able to double check the work, right, or help expand that. So then I had to go out and try to find something in the marketplace, right? So when I go out in the marketplace at that point, XDR wasn't a thing. It was really MDR, right? Was the trumpet that the drum that everyone was beating. Sorry to mix my music metaphors, but I got to looking at that and I was like, well, that's great. But we kind of had this weird divergence where I'm trying to get my hands in the picture here. I should just turn on mirror mode. So where we have like this kind of user signal based telemetry. And what I mean by that is application use, authentication, endpoint, mailbox, all those sort of things, right? Collaboration, signals. And then you have over here your traditional SIM, maybe a bit more focused on infrastructure, looking at network logs, flow logs, firewall logs, maybe looking at endpoint, but probably mainly just focus on servers because we couldn't consume all the logs in my costing model from all my endpoints. So just trying to figure that balance out, right? So then, well, let's get a SIM. Let's dump all those logs somewhere and try to look at it, right? So we create these gigantic data cemeteries, right, where we bury all of our log data, and we hope to resurrect it at some time. It may be helpful, or when incident response comes in, or i.e. the lawyers come asking for discovery, right? So then we have this huge data cemetery, and we may have some analytics on top to paint some pretty pictures, and maybe throw in a little bit of data science or ML or whatever you want to call it, right? To kind of help give you some of that correlation and alerting. But did it pay off? I mean, did we see that happen in the market? Were teams really? Yeah. I mean, in reality, right?
Nobody could afford it.
Right. So then you start to get that
crack,
right, in that problem statement of, this is where my SIM lives and this is where my tools are, but my operators have to be in here.
And my other practical experience, it's hard enough to afford that, to continue to afford it as your logs scale, but your budget doesn't scale as fast as your logs scale. Do the care and feeding to keep it up and running. But then kind of thinking what you said about XDR, of pulling the pieces together and being able to create a picture across my various tools. And that to me is really, if people could afford it, and if they could implement a tool like SIM in addition to their existing tools, then there's the whole, well, how do I pull this together and have the integration between those things? And those integrations, in my experience, are terribly difficult for the corporate IT world. I mean, the non-integration of SIM is, there was always this premise there of, I could integrate it with a bunch of things, but
right.
You start with a set of people who are actually getting meaningful use out of their SIM, and then, try to then take that to the level of, and I have it totally integrated with all of my security solutions. When, by the way, those integrations are they're not as off the shelf as the SIM vendors might lead you, but meaning they're sort of massive projects.
A lot of squeeze to that juice.
Yeah.
So I was actually gonna go the other way with it, Brian. I think the integrations are fairly easy as far as like when we look at the overall problem statement. But and maybe I misunderstand this. Now, when XDR first came out, I was like, what is XDR? I need to look this up. So I found the XDR Alliance, and what I learned about it is that they are an alliance.
Yes, very good. Yes.
So we had that. And so then I had to go further. But one of the predicates of XDR is that we have a quality data cemetery, as you put it. And the issue with that predicate is that a lot of people just can't afford it. That like it's just not achievable based on the cost of it. So does XDR solve for that problem, or does it exacerbate that problem?
So I think what you look at is, so when you look at SIM, right, or SIM SOAR, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Integration for anybody can collect logs.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's table stakes. Why have a SIM if it's not a log aggregator? Period. Then you put the analytics on top so we can actually get some sort of visuals out of this, reporting, whatever we need for compliance and anybody else, consumers, right, outside of the operators. And then we start to get even more difficulty in integration when we start talking about SOAR, right, actually taking action in anything, right? Whether that be analyst driven or machine driven. And then being able to trust it to work reliably, and then care and feed and maintain that as well, right? So you have this kind of like very like, we handed you a SIM and a SOAR platform. Now hire up your engineering and hire up your analyst and hire up your architects and figure it all out, get everything glued together, and then help maintain it, right? Meanwhile, you're losing employees every 2 years. You're trying to bring in folks from other side.
Wow, you can keep employees for 2 years? That's incredible.
Yeah, that's a generous statement. Coming out of the pandemic, right? Pre-pandemic, maybe. But the side that where XDR kind of comes in is they're like, let us handle the glue, right? Let us get the integrations built in. And when we talk about alliances, right? So then it's making sure those APIs can all talk together.
Sure.
And we have either activities we can go against APIs, against other resources, whether it be a mailbox or a cloud workload or whatever, right? An authentication source, an IDP to shut off an account. Those things, they somewhat work, but then again, you have this problem where SIM's supposed to correlate, but you have tons of alerts and very few incidents, right?
Yeah, but the way I understand XDR is you still have these base levels that you need. You still need a good logging strategy and architecture. Then you need a SIM with that, or multiple SIMs. Let's be honest, not many organizations. It takes a long time to implement SIMs. You're probably going to have many of them through M&As. Then you have to tie that together, and you have to have some type of sort, and then you can add XDR. XDR doesn't really replace all that stuff.
I would say no, but here's what I would argue, right? So when we used to look at SOCs back when I was with a much larger Fortune 50-ish organization, right? And we had a SOC, and we had people in front of screens and keys on keyboard, right? We talked about things, we delineated not necessarily between tiering, you could call it tiering, but we did our tiering based on minutes, hours, weeks, and months. And what I mean by that is if you're IR or your forensics, right? Or if you're immediate IR, are you just doing proactive threat hunting? Are you doing forensics on a known incident, right? And so where XDR kind of shines is that layer, that thin layer. A lot of folks, so I'll break it down and so just hold on to that for a second, right? I guess I want to explain a little bit about XDRs kind of in two camps, right? So you have one camp, which is I'm a hybrid XDR, and I consume log sources from APIs across a coalition of go-to-markets, right? So whether I'm got an EDR vendor and they happen to have an alliance with an IDP, and then they can kind of draw those together, right, into a platform to surface stuff. But they're not going to keep that for 6 months, right? They may keep that for 30 days, right? To take immediate action, hunt, things like that. And then if you want to go forensics or go deeper, you need a strategy, right, for those logs, like you're saying. But you can implement that kind of medium XDR was kind of like the crawl and the full crawl, walk, run, or maybe a little closer to walk in the crawl, walk, run kind of model. Whereas run, you have SIM and XDR together, right? Where you can kind of bring those pieces together where you have different skill sets doing different things in those tools, right? So that's the hybrid model. So the other model is the platform model. And that's where you have an agent for everything going into this one platform, right? And so one would argue you get some billions of dollars being spent by that manufacturer, that platform provider, to do data normalization, to try to get you high fidelity alerts, to do the things that they do, right?
So here we're thinking about the large software company, the usual suspects, the alphabet, if you will.
I think it's Netscape.
Yeah, Netscape. Yeah.
So you would think, you would look at a large software provider that would be an identity provider for the world, largest mailbox provider for the world, large collaboration suite that's used in most companies. So having kind of like those signals and then being able to take actions across all that and normalize all those signals in a, let's say, a graph API, if you will, or some sort of API. And then being able to feed your tools and like, right, gives you an advantage in that standpoint. So it's depending on where you're at, right, with your company.
And I think we're seeing those camps. I'm going to piece it together as an alliance because I have a piece of that alliance, or there's the I have somewhat of my own universe of solutions. And so that would be the Microsofts, Googles, maybe Palo Altos of the world, where
maybe Cisco, with an
yeah,
app and
I can build my own,
yeah.
Some large portion of a stack that I can start with. Well, I can instrument this, and I can build, most of those organizations. I can move away from maybe the Splunk kind of universe of on-premise and tie it more to a cloud-based data storage for those pieces of it, right? So,
yeah,
okay.
I mean, so what I was kind of up against, right, is I needed to find a solution that could help me better collect all the logs and start to look at them. And I looked at everybody who wanted to put a log collector on my site and charge me, and they wanted to know what my, events per second were and determine costing. And I was like, listen, I'm one guy. I've got, two part-time people in IT. I don't have a SOC engineer. I'm not going to stand up a SOC. I'm not going to do these things, right? So, and then second of all, I needed predictive pricing because my CFO looked at me like, well, how much is this going to cost me as we acquire new companies?
Between nothing and $1 million.
Right, exactly. Somewhere in there, right? Which was unacceptable. So I had to come up with predictive pricing based on a user count or endpoint count or something that I could predictive,
like a price times quantity kind of thing.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So, I went out to the market. I found a couple of providers. Some were much more Fortune 50 friendly, say the Alphabets of the world, versus like maybe somebody was like down in my kind of like $1 bill or less worth of revenue, right? Kind of world, manufacturing. So I found a company in Michigan that met my needs, but they were probably positioning more as themselves as a cloud SIM, right? But they wanted to do predictive pricing per user. So that's what I went with. The whole time I'm encouraging them like, hey, I don't want you to build a SOAR platform. I don't want you to tell me to go to a SOAR platform. I want you to just do natural remediations take effect on my infrastructure based on what you're seeing here. I want you to be able to isolate a machine. I want you to be able to reset an account, right? So I had those building blocks that I knew what I had deployed or what I'd have to deploy to kind of figure out the costing as well. So that's kind of where I went to. But to be honest with you, that provider ended up being more of a cloud SIM. So I needed to look at a platform XDR that's something I could pop into very quickly, take a look at what the alerts were because they were coming into an incident, and then determine actions that I could take. And then on top of that, say, go ahead and take these automated actions of resetting accounts or shutting off mailboxes, or remove email from that's already been delivered that match these risks, right? So I kind of had that tier 1 analyst turn into a bot that I had to be able to take these actions automatically and then tell me what happened and then determine if I need to take additional action on top. That's kind of the story of where I led and where I was looking in the marketplace and hoping to mature a company into more of an XDR. But at the end of the day, right, SIEM/SOAR has its place, XDR has its place. I think it's really dependent on how mature your organization is and what your security capabilities are, depending on what your size is and in determining what you can afford, right? I mean, all those things. And you could say that about any security platform, to be honest with you, but that was the main driver for me. And I've talked a lot, so I want to hear you guys.
No, well, and I'm going to ask a question. I wonder, as you kind of described your evolution, Aaron and I talk with people all the time that sort of, there are these high-end Fortune 50 companies or people who are very embedded in a more advanced an industry that's been at it for longer, like financial services. And then there are all sorts of people we talk to that sort of, missed that memo and they just got it now and they're catching up. And you hope in those cases like that you can skip all the, there was this steps in evolution everybody went with, and it's like, you don't have to go through all those evolutionary steps. If you missed the EDR phenomenon, you don't need to buy one today to then go to MD, you could go straight to MDR. And I'm wondering if that's the case, maybe not even so much with MDR, but if you missed the SIEM/SOC SOAR craze, is this a situation where, skip that, skip?
Do you skip jail and collect your $200, or do you still have to do some of that to get to XDR?
Or if that's a question, I guess that's.
Well, I think you raised a good point, right? So it's a matter of going through that, like, hey, let's go ahead and roll AV or endpoint protection and see how that works. And then like, oh, well, I missed the boat. I need to get now an EDR on top of that to figure out what's going on. And then, well, I might as well go manage, MDR, because I don't want that headache, right, of dealing with that tier 1 false alarms and everything else, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it offers you. And I think the other thing that we're seeing too is those hybrid players are starting to either acquire companies or grow offerings. So for example, SentinelOne just acquired a TiVo for $600 million. So they're obviously going to go after the identity play, right? So now they're going to go, now I've got the endpoint, I've got identity, what's next, right? Maybe Graph API to look at my mailboxes and start taking some actions there. You saw it when CrowdStrike acquired Humio, right? So we can get some analytics and some reporting into CrowdStrike. And then on top of that, they start to see them moving into identity as well, putting agents on Active Directory and helping with lateral movement attacks and things like that. So I think you're seeing movement in both areas in the market as well.
So people that aren't platform plays are bit by bit maybe sneaking up on it and moving in that direction of have some portion of a platform, maybe fewer external things to integrate or plug in.
So I have a question. So I always find, as technology matures, I always find myself in the Betamax 8-track moment, or the HD
Blu-ray,
DVD or Blu-ray.
Yes.
Of like, am I gonna buy a whole library of HD DVDs and then like later regret that the industry standard became Blu-ray? Like XDR still feels like it's in that moment of like, it's kind of a big bet one way or the other. And if you're not the right bet, there may be a lot of regret associated with that. Am I wrong about that's just a gut feel for me? Is that what do you guys think about that?
I think it's a fair statement. I mean, I think you're in an uncertain part of the market right now where there's a lot of movement, a lot of change. We saw the same thing with CASBs, right? There was APIs, and then we're going to do we're going to do a web proxy, and then my SWIGs, and oh my God, I put all this money into SWIGs. Like, oh, now I got to go and do everything in a cloud proxy, and then I need steering aid. So yeah, it's always a natural evolution. I got my on-prem SIM, it works great. Now I got to go to the cloud. I can't consume cloud APIs. So I mean, I think you have that natural progression of, do I do navel gazing and not take action, or do I have a bias towards action and at least do something now, right? And I think it really depends a lot on, is the house on fire or is it not, or do you know it's on fire?
Yeah, I'm going to respond. I could be, as normal, totally wrong, and I'm sure you'll let that pass without comment if I'm totally wrong. But like, I think about what the model we've seen so far around like MDR, and I have seen cases of people changing out the more sort of what I call lightweight MDR, where it's truly an MD. It's not MDR of the fashion of, I bought CrowdStrike and then I bought somebody to manage separately to manage my CrowdStrike for me, and then they built all these integrations. But I think there are more sort of like boxed up MDR solutions out there, without naming any names. And I think, it seems to me, I could be wrong, but from what I've seen, trading out one of those for another one of those is not the same as like, I'm going to trade out routers in my data center. It's not a thousands of hours project. It's you could probably do it in 30 days if you were really, really motivated. And so I wonder, naively, I think if you take that, if you think about it that way and kind of look for things that aren't super hardwire integrated, maybe XDR, if you dip your toe, if you're dipping your toe into that, maybe a more of a cloud kind of provider is not going to be quite so difficult to rip out later, and have buyer's remorse, make a different decision. But I could be talking crazy talk there. I mean, that's how I'm thinking about it.
I would see that if you're looking for platform versus hybrid, if I was going to do a hybrid play, I would probably not try to sign a 3 to 5 year deal. Right? I would try to do like, let's do a year. You earn the business, and then we'll see, right? Like, is your roadmap smoke and mirrors, or is it actually happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a little bit of that hedge bet against the Betamax versus VHS, right? And Brian, I echo you in the fact that the only considerations you may have to think of, and again, another place where SIM comes over XDR is, if I got my logs and they're all sitting in my SIM, maybe it makes it easier to swap out the XDR, right? Because all I'm really looking about is that 30 days worth of actionable intel, right, that I can work on. I've still got my data cemetery where I can go and do my hunts and everything else, right? So it may be easier to do A for B or B for C.
You used the data cemetery buzzword, so I'm going to bring on here our good friend Andy wants to know:
is the data cemetery the new data lake?
Data cemetery, the new data lake. That's
I stole that, to be completely transparent, from somebody else I won't name, but to give them credit. But just know I'm not that smart. But I just latched onto it because really we talk about, I need it for 7 years of telemetry from endpoints. Okay.
You're not even going to work here in 7 years.
Right.
No one will be able to find it. Yeah.
Right. So let's create this data cemetery that we can stick everything into. And again, I think a lot of companies just don't have the time. Another thing that XDR has, which SIMs do claim to do as well, is have the built-in rules and analytics, right, that are more like turnkey than versus going into design, right? I think we've all had that experience of looking at a data lake and going, okay, now I got to build some sort of detection based on this data, right? And now I've got to figure out, do I normalize it? Do I use some sort of big query or something else, right, to kind of go across all this stuff to figure it out? And there are smart people that do that, and God bless them. But as a security professional, I didn't have time, right? I was like, what can you get me out of the box that gets me 80% there?
Yeah.
And then I'll figure out expanding scope.
Okay. Well, we're wrapping up. Closing thoughts. So yeah, my parting question is, I talk about the core tools, like in the old days we had antivirus and SIM. I've had a mindset of, for most companies, even middle market companies, you probably need MDR as well. Is XDR the new MDR? Should today or tomorrow, should I be adding XDR? Is that my required solution stack?
I would argue that you're going to see XDR as the new EDR, and MXDR is going to be the new MDR.
Oh, Lord.
Look at that.
What have you done?
Because, right, so you look at these offerings, right, the
answer is don't dig in, just go buy all new tools.
My God.
Right, because at the end of the day,
I dislike you so very much.
You got to do that EDR work. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that XDR work. You stitched everything together for me, or I bought into the platform. Still work. Man, wouldn't it be great if somebody could do it for me, right? So maybe MXDR is the next phase.
Oh, brother. Awesome. I'm gonna leave it there. Are you speechless, Aaron, or do you have a parting thought?
I do have a quick parting thought, and maybe it's something to follow up on another time. I always come back to if you could only do one thing today with your budget or your time, is XDR that thing? Where does that fall in the ranking? And so that's still an open question for me. Yes.
And it should be, right? I don't want to cut you off. If you had more to
say.
No,
you're fine. Okay. Please.
Yeah, I mean, so my whole thing is I understand the question, and it's an important thought process to have, but on the other side of me, I hate it with a burning passion when we talk about what's the one thing we could do, right? Because the reality is it's not just one thing. You can't do one thing, right? There are priorities. And
I think most people are doing no things about it. So one is better than zero.
Right. And I agree with you on that. But security doesn't fix technical debt. Security doesn't fix bad architecture, right? You have to have a foundation to build your castle on. And if your foundation, and we built that castle and it burned down and then it fell into the swamp, right? It's at the end of the day, if you do one thing, I would say rationalize your tool set you have today and understand your architecture.
There you go.
Right?
So having XDR on all my 2003 web servers probably isn't the answer. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, that's as good a place as any to wrap up today. I appreciate you joining us, Arlie. Come back come back anytime.
Sure.
Round of
soundboard.
Yeah, nice round of applause, and we'll
see you, fellas.
See you soon.
See ya.
Happy
Absolutely.
St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Ooh, yeah, that's right.